young learners and saying, yes, they can also be involved in critical thinking. Now, we tend to think of critical thinking skill as the polar opposite of basic skills. So, one side critical, one side basic skills. And if we are teachers of beginning English learners, we think of ourselves as the ones who are responsible for teaching these basic skills. However, the two skills, the basic and the critical thinking, are not on a horizontal scale, but rather we put them as part of a hierarchy. Where based on the ground, we have these basic skills, and then way on the top, up in the clouds, we do have this possibility of critical thinking. We think that we need to first provide the core of vocabulary, pronunciation, grammatical knowledge before they can reach these higher levels. And the idea is that once the base is firm, this is a conventional understanding, we can then slowly add layer and layer and layer, and finally we have to cement these together, and when they're finally firm, and when the mortar is dry, we can lay the next level. But by this thinking, critical thinking is kind of like a satellite dish on the roof. It's the cool stuff. It's the stuff we'd like to have, but because we're responsible educators, we have to build a strong house first. Nod, please. Everyone nod. I don't really agree with this. But the result of this is that we never get to critical thinking, even with the baccalaureate students. We keep on thinking that, well, the structure is still wobbly. We're not there yet. It's like the grammar is never perfect. And the students keep forgetting the vocabulary that we taught last week. And at the beginning of this year, we have to review what happened last year. So it's January before we start moving forward. And the result is, as you know here, the students don't even bother filling in the writing section at the bottom. They just don't feel comfortable with this kind of synthetic creative thinking. So what I want to propose today is a different relationship between basic and critical thinking that removes that hierarchy. Instead of layers with the basic at the bottom and the critical thinking at the top, we have cycles. So instead of waiting forever for students to be ready for critical thinking, we constantly appeal to critical thinking as necessary for the effective language learning right from the beginning. According to this, critical thinking then is not the icing on the cake, but rather is the yeast in the bread. Now to follow that pun, follow the pun is what the students need in order to turn flour and water into the nutrition for their brain, so they can actually use it, kneading like that. Okay, but in order to accept this, we have to stop confusing the lack of knowledge with a lack of sophisticated intelligence. This conference is focused on middle schoolers who may be learning, if they're beginners, words like dog and cat in English, but on the very same day that they're figuring out algebraic equations in math class. To learn in L2 or L3 or 4, we cannot assume that the learner is the same person who was learning as a child very L1. We need to use their cognitive maturity to make up for the difference, the lag of 12, 14 years, to try to catch up. And we have to use those abilities. But how is it done in practice? Now, if I go back to that extreme example of cat and dog as a beginner vocabulary, we can perhaps offer an activity. Suppose that this was a list of the words that we are trying to teach that day. Now, often we'll use flashcards, which strengthen short-term memory. Keep on practicing those through repetition. And often we might use pictures or some sort of reality. I bring them a tiger into class or something of that sort. Stuff one maybe. And these visual associations certainly are very helpful as mnemonic devices. Yet even with skills don't seem to be working as well. So they can recognize, perhaps in reading, but to actually use them has not been achieved yet. So we can perhaps create cards and ask students to sort them. Now, if you look at these 8 words here, think for a minute, like, how would you sort these together if you were creating groups? So think for a half a minute, because I don't have much time, about which words you would put together. If you were a group of students, we'll take 4 students here, have you sit together, you're aided by the pictures, and perhaps by a conversation we already had, and as a group, how would you sort these into smaller groups? What's that? What's that? Okay, yeah, wild animals and domestic. Anything else?
The cat family.
What's that?
The cat family.
But the cat family, so a very different one. So that one, we have the house cat together with tigers and lions.
Species.
What's that?
Species.
Species. So what species do we have?
Canine.
Okay, we have canine also. So we end up having a wolf together with a dog there. Awesome. Okay, what's that? Endangered. That would be interesting also. And we could on the other side put the dog together with the sheep, right? Because they might help the shepherd. Many different possibilities.
Food chain.
And what's that?
Why not food chain?
Food chain, right. And where would you put yourself? The point being that as we ask people to arrange them, you'll have a discussion. In that discussion, you'll be using the words. So you'll be recycling the words, and you'll be using your cognitive thoughts about how it might work. Now, as you did that, I mean, this idea of tickling in the brain, when you think that, oh, wild and domestic, canine, all these things, there's sort of something going on in your brain. You can actually feel it. Well, am I the only one?
Richard.
I don't see, my back is to you, I can't see it. So we have this idea of this tickling, and what that tickling is really your cognitive thinking skills that are being activated. And what's really happening is that they're being networked. When you put domestic animals together and you put cat animals together, you're beginning to entwine them with other ideas in your brain. They're getting into a deeper part of your brain. So I think I have to really go. Now, the one thing about this is you notice that there were several right answers. And the idea would be that perhaps you got that group, and they would talk to other groups. And, say, well, my group is better than your group. Again, that negotiation will stretch their language, because these are beginners. Their language will not be sophisticated as a negotiator. However, it will be sophisticated thought process, and they will stretch those abilities. By not having just one, you remove some of the embarrassment, saying, let me try this idea. And that can be effective in taking away fear. Language learners are afraid of making mistakes. I will not try to speak Derek. I'm too embarrassed. But if we have these multiple possibilities, we have many other, the willingness to say, but because I live in a village, I know that sheep and goats and dogs go together. We know that because we're in a village, and the people in the city might have a very different point of view. So we have different kinds of strengths that can come out. These are other things, of course, we do. We could be excluding one from that, and you say, chicken, dinosaur, bat. Which one would you exclude from that logically? Dinosaur. Anyone else?
Why not a chicken?
Why not a chicken? Why would a bat and a dinosaur go together?
Mammals.
They look very much alike.
One possible answer is that the chicken and the dinosaur go together because in the evolutionary path, birds came among dinosaurs. The point being of this is not to be clever, but to bring what they learned in a science class into an English class. And so when we open the door, not only to their eyes, to their possibilities, but we take someone who's weak in English and someone who might have remembered that from science, and we put those together. I think I most likely run out of time. I would love to talk about other possibilities, but this is just this idea of groups working together, negotiating, sorting, is just one possibility. We can move to grammar in other ways. We can use pronunciation, as I have a later slide. I thought I had 20 minutes, you see. So I just would like to encourage you. The idea that we have is that it's only our best students, the ones who are already successful, who are able to use critical thinking. Oh, they're smart. They can use critical thinking. They're ready. But it's actually the other students who are most likely benefit the most because they have those skills, even though you make that mistake and you confuse their low language ability with a lack of sophisticated intelligence. They are supercomputers, all of us. And I just encourage us to use them. So I'll stop there. Okay? Thank you very so much.